Hello and welcome back to my Billy Sweatshirt sew along. So today we are going to set our sleeves in. Now I am making the gathered sleeve. You've got three versions of sleeve that come with the pattern. You can do a gathered sleeve, you can do a straightforward sleeve, or you can do a 3/4 length straightforward sleeve. Now I'm going to do the gathered one just because it looks really pretty, but also then I can show you how to do it. If you're doing the straight sleeve, then you don't need to do the next step, but you're very welcome to watch and learn about gathers. So what I'm going to do is I'll take my sleeve pattern, I'm going to turn it over so I'm looking at the wrong side. And the first thing that I want to do is where you've got these notches that we snipped, I'm just going to highlight them with my chalk pen, because once we get gathering, it can be a little bit hard to see them. So just by popping a bit of bright pink chalk there, or whatever colour you choose, it's just going to make it easier. I'm going to do that on both of them. Now where am I? I should have a notch somewhere down here. There they are. So I've got two notches there. Now you've got two notches, as always, on the back and one notch on the front, and that is very what's the word I'm looking for? That is conventional. So all patterns you will see will have two notches on the back and one notch on the front. And it's not very obvious with this sleeve because the pattern's been enlarged to allow for the gathering, but the pitch of this curve on the front is different. It's sort of, if you think from your shoulder round the back of your arm, it kind of has further to travel than across the front. So this shape here across your sleeve head, from your underarm all the way over the top to your shoulder and all the way back down again, it isn't symmetrical. So it's very important that you get your sleeves in the right way, and you should have cut a pair of sleeves, hopefully. So you should have one like this, and then the other one should be the mirror image. So the first thing to do is, just if you're doing the gathered sleeves, I just think it's a good idea to highlight those notches, because these notches are really going to help you get your sleeve set in well. It's really important that you've got those notches on there. If you can't find your little snips, maybe they were too shallow or you just forgot to make them, just bring the pattern piece back over, lay it on the top, and just transfer those crucial markings, the shoulder head, the front notch and the back notch, and do that on both of your sleeves. So there's my pair of sleeves ready to go. What we're going to do is we're going to sew some gathers in between the back and front notches. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a straight stitch on our sewing machine, and we're going to increase our stitch length, and we're not going to back stitch. And once we've done those stitches, I will show you how we can use them to gather across the head of the sleeve on both of the sleeves. Because this sleeve is wide at the bottom and gathers into the cuff, we're also going to do some gather stitches around the hem. And like I say, if you're doing a plain sleeve, you don't have to worry about doing this bit, but this is for the gathered sleeve, this is the next stage. So let's hop over to our sewing machine and get sewing. I'm over at my sewing machine and I'm going to go for a straight stitch, and I'm going to increase my stitch length to 5, which is the longest it will go. Anything from 4 to 5 is fine. At the first notch there, I'm going to place my sleeve head under my machine, and I'm going to line up the raw edge with the edge of my foot. That's about 1/2 centimetre in, or just over. And I'm just going to sew all the way round this curved edge here. And these stitches, now in the tilly and the buttons directions, they say to rethread your machine in a contrast colour, so that these stitches are easier to pick out later on. I'm going to be honest with you, I kind of cheat. I don't pick them out if I can. I just think, well, if they start to unravel, I can pick them. But the reason why she says to do it in a bright colour is so that you can unpick those stitches later. But I think if you're overlocking, they're all going to get kind of chopped up and tangled into your overlocking anyway. I don't know, I just think I'm going to slightly deviate away from their very fantastic instructions, just from my own preference of how I do things, and I'm going to keep it the same colour. So I'm kind of disobeying the rules here, but here we go. Now, because you've increased your stitch length, be aware that it will jog through your machine quite quickly. The longer the stitch, the quicker the sewing. Also, you're going round a curve, so just take your time, and you can just reposition by lifting your foot and swiveling the fabric round a little, making sure that your needle is down. And you want to do 2 rows. And again, in the instructions she says 3, but personally I think you can get away with 2. It's just my personal preference. You don't have to do as I say. You can always do 3 rows if you like and use the contrasting colour, but this is how I'm going to do it. So the first row I did about 1/2 centimetre in, and then the next row again I'll just match the first row with the side of my foot, and just so I'm coming in altogether about 1.5 centimetres, I suppose. And I'm just going to follow that round again. And these stitches, they will do the job of gathering up your sleeve head, and then once you've attached your sleeve into your dress, they've done their job, and they can be picked out, but sometimes they can get sort of rather difficult to pick out if they've been caught up in your stitches, and therefore if they are the same colour, it's not going to show up. Right, so I'm just going to explain it to you now before I go and do the rest of the gathering stitch. So I've got my 2 rows of stitching, which you probably can't see all that clearly, going around that sleeve head. Can you see those? Just about make them out. This is where doing them in a bright colour actually probably would be quite helpful. Then you can just grab those tail ends there, because you haven't done a back stitch, this is loose. You can just grab those and you will be able to travel your fabric along. So this is how we create gathers. And I would just say go along and ruche that up as much as you can. And then when we come to fit our sleeve head into our armhole, we will just splay it out to fit. And that's where the notches really help us match things up. So can you see how just by holding the 2 threads on the top, and I'm leaving the 2 on the bottom loose and free, I can just travel the fabric along the stitches, and that's why they're bigger stitches. It's easier to travel them along. And that fabric is just gathering and sliding along there. It looks really pretty. And then you can take your threads from the other side. Children are having a wonderful time. They've got a very deep bath. We've had a snow day today. It's been absolutely marvellous. We've been sledging, we've had hot chocolates, we've built a snowman. It's brilliant. I love snow. So there you go. So I've now gone right from my notch at the back, my notch at the front. Can you see where I put that pink chalk mark? And I've just gathered that up, and that will eventually, I mean, look at how pretty that is. That will eventually be my sleeve head there. And this particular loop back is quite lightweight, so it takes to those gathers very nicely. Okay, so I'm going to do that on the other shoulder, and then I'm just going to literally do the same process along the hem. Now with the sleeve hem, that's going to gather into the cuff, so we're going to put the gather stitches there, but we're just going to leave them be, and then we'll gather those up when we're ready to put the cuff on in a later stage. And there we are. So I've now done that gathering stitch right from the 1 notch at the front, past the shoulder and through to the double notches at the back, and I've gathered those along, and then the same again on the other side. And then at the hem, I've just got the 2 rows of gathering stitches ready to gather up when at a later stage we are going to pop them into their cuffs. So the next thing that you need to do is grab your dress panels. Okay, so lay your dress out on the table in front of you, looking at the right side. I've got my front dress and my back dress here. And then we're going to take the sleeves and we're going to lay them right sides together. So first of all, you need to make sure that you've got the right sleeve. So that's got one notch there and two notches there. So I know that this has to go to the back. That's got the two notches, meaning it's on the back of the dress. And that's got one notch, meaning that that's on the front part of the armhole. So I know that that sleeve goes there, back matched to back, front matched to front. And here's my little notch that I marked in the middle there, and you can see with all those gathers why I appreciate having that chalk mark there. It's much easier to find than the little cut. So, hello Pusscat, hello. The cat's going to join us. So what I'm going to do to start off with is I'm going to match my shoulder notch with my shoulder seam, and I should just pop a pin there. She's like, what's going on? Why is the ground cold and white outside? And where's my dinner? Then what we're going to do is just splay out those gathers a little. Just gently splay them out until the front notch matches the notch that we cut on our armhole here. So you've gathered them up, and now you're just going to tease and pull those gathers out a little, and you just want to keep those raw edges matching. And this is kind of a funny thing, because you're matching a curve going this way, your sleeve curve is going this way, and your armhole is going that way. So you're kind of matching opposing curves together. And this is the way that we do sleeves with stretch knit. So if you were making a t-shirt or a jersey dress, pretty much this is the way that you do the sleeves. With a woven dress, you'd complete the armhole by sewing together the side seams, and then you'd set the sleeve in. But this is like the t-shirt method. So, or the all-in-one method sometimes it's called. So you can see that I've matched my front notch with my front notch on my armhole. And to get the sleeve positioned correctly, it's just really important that you do obey those notches. So it's really important at the earlier stages that you've marked everything on. So I can see that those two notches on the back match the two notches on my armhole, and I should put another pin in there. And now the rest should be fairly straightforward. So this should match up nicely. And then what I'll do, I'll pull that up here, is I will now go round. I'll do one sleeve at a time, and I'll just put in loads of pins to help me. And you can use pins or you can use wonder clips, but I'm just going to walk the fabric together with my fingers, matching the raw edges, pinning as I go. And when you turn this, because you're making a three-dimensional shape here, you're making the part of the garment that goes, you know, you've got your shoulder, and then your body falls down into an arm. That's a funny way of saying it, but yeah, you're making that sort of very three-dimensional shape from your shoulder down to your arm. So you've got this sort of two curves that you're sewing together, and when you turn them through, you'll have your sleeve head. So with this bit now, I've got the gathered area. I'm just going to make sure the gathers are pretty even across the shoulder head area. Now if you're not doing the gathers and you're doing the plain sleeve, the process is exactly the same. So what you're going to do is you're just going to take your plain sleeve and you're going to match up the shoulder notches, and then you're going to match up the notches at the front and pin them, and then you're just going to walk your fabric round and pin all the way round. The difference is that you won't have gathers here, your fabric will just be flat. And actually in a way that's more difficult, because with gathers you can hide a multitude of sins, and it's easy to get it to fit because you're just scrunching one thing up into another. If you're doing the flat sleeve without the gathered head, it is a bit more tricky because you want to get that seam perfectly smooth without any puckers or wrinkles. And obviously with gathers, it is puckers and wrinkles, which is perfect. You don't have anything to hide, a bit more tricky to do a beautifully smooth shoulder head. I like gathered sleeves for that exact reason. I might need to grab some more pins. Right, so you get the idea. I'm going to continue to pin all around this side, and again, it's bit more obvious on the one the plain sleeve. You're kind of pinning together those curves, one that's going this way and one that's going that way, because you're pinning together the shoulder head with the armhole. Don't worry, just walk the fabric round, matching the raw edges. It might feel a little strange, but once you've sewn it and turned it through, it will create that beautiful three-dimensional shape across your shoulder. So I just wanted to show you at this stage what you should have. Hopefully that's clear for you to see. There's my underarm on the front there, and I'm coming all the way across. That's my shoulder there, and that's my underarm on the back, and I've pinned my sleeve to my dress. So there's my dress, and it's right sides together. There's my sleeve, there's my dress, right sides together, and pinned all the way around that curve. And I'm now going to sew it together. If you turn it over the right side, there you go, that's what you end up with. So I just wanted to show you how that looks, and then I'm going to I am overlocking this, but because sleeves are tricky, I like to sew first with my sewing machine and then move on to my overlocker for the final sweep. There we are, so I've put that under my machine and lowered my presser foot and lowered my needle to anchor the fabric, and I'm just going to baste. So I'm just going to use a straight stitch, and I'm just going to baste, and all that basting is doing is holding everything together so that I can remove the pins. And it means that when I go over to my overlocker, I don't have to worry about putting a pin in my overlocker, which might not be a good idea. And I also it just makes it easier once I come to doing my overlocking, because it's already kind of joined together. Now again, if you are using the plain sleeve without the gathers and you're using your overlocker to make your dress, I really highly recommend that you do the basting first on your sewing machine and then move to your overlocker. Because if you have, and you're using the plain sleeve and you have a pleat, a pucker, a wrinkle, something unwanted, you can always unpick it on your sewing machine very easily, and then you can get it right, and then you can move over to your overlocker. If you go straight over to your overlocker, and maybe this is the first time you've made something like this and there's a mistake, you can't really unpick overlocking very easily because it's chomped away at your seam allowance as well. And I just think sewing it on your, basting everything together on your sewing machine first before overlocking, it's an extra step, but it just makes life easier, and it's worth that extra effort. Now I'm just coming in about a centimetre to do this basting stitch. Like I say, all this basting stitch is really doing is making my life easier by holding everything together. And I can go nice and slow on my sewing machine, and I can just check at each point, is it as it ought to be? Is it all beautifully lined up? Have I got any wrinkles where I don't want them? Yes, is the answer to that. I've got lots of wrinkles, but with regards to my sewing, I don't have any wrinkles. My little joke there. Right, I have such a lot of wrinkles after the year 2020. So you can just go nice and slowly and check everything is right. Just pull that into place. I think sewing in gathers is one of the most satisfying things because the end result is so pretty. And I just love gathered sleeve heads. I've got narrow shoulders, so a gathered sleeve head is good for me. Gives me like the shoulders of a normal person. I need shoulder implants. I love a shoulder pad. Right, round we come. I'll check underneath if everything's nice and smooth. And I just continue all the way around, and I just repeat this same process on the other sleeve. And actually this makes it easy because you really do want the notches to match up, and you really do want the raw edges to match up. If you come astray with your seam allowance, your raw edges or your notches, on your sleeve it's really going to show. So this is your way to get perfect sleeves, is just to use lots of pins, baste it, check it, go nice and slowly. And look at how they match up at the end. Huh. Impressive. Hope yours do that too. There we are. So that's my sleeve. Just basted in place now. And if we turn that through, it starts to take shape. There you go. So now that I've basted that, going onto the overlocker is going to be that little bit easier, because all I'm going to really do now, I'm still going to go nice and slowly on the overlocker, but I don't have any pins or wonder clips in my way, and I'm just going to now go around there. And I can obviously, now I'm going to be going with a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, which is the seam allowance on the pattern, and I'm going to be, my overlocker will be lobbing off a bit of the extra seam allowance. Now if you're using a sewing machine, I would say still baste, take a look, are you happy with your sleeve? If not, unpick, redo, and you know, if this is the first time you're doing this, don't worry if you have to unpick a few times, that's perfectly normal with sleeves, it takes a bit of practice. So you know, baste first, because basting stitches, they're a longer length and they're easier to unpick. That's why we do basting stitches at a 4 or 5 length, because they're easy to unpick if you get it wrong. And then once you're happy and you think, yeah, that's good, then you can switch your sewing machine back over to your lightning stitch or your zigzag stitch or whichever stretch stitch you're using, and then you can sew it for real. And you know, those zigzag stitches are hard to unpick, so that's why it's good to do a little baste first, check you're happy, and then once you're happy you can go along to do your stretch stitch. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to now go over to my overlocker. Right, so I'm now ready to overlock these two together. I've given myself a bit of a guide here of, I measured in from the edge 1.5, just so that I know where, it gives me a bit of a starting point. And I can see that my raw edge there is matching up with the 1.5 guide. Your overlocker might be slightly different. Just remember that you should be sewing or overlocking with a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Now that we've done all our basting and our holding in place and our gathering, you're now actually sewing that seam together. So that's a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance that you're going to be using. And I'm just going to take it nice and slowly. And again, don't, after all this hard work, just make sure that you haven't got any of your dress caught up underneath that overlocker blade, and just take it nice and slowly round that curve. My overlocker does have a light on it, but I'll show you what happens. You can't really see, can you, if I put the light on? It's really super bright, so I switch the light off when I'm doing these tutorials. But hopefully you can see. And can you see that it's just chopping off that excess 1/2 centimetre or whatever? It's about that. You can't check enough times. You can't, there's not a race going on here. The slower the better. I keep looking under to check that I haven't caught anything up underneath there, because with overlocking there's sort of, it's difficult. There's no going back. With sewing it's easy to unpick, although it's not pleasant to unpick, at least it's easy. There's quite a bit of a bulk of fabric to deal with in this particular stage, because you've got your entire front and back and your sleeve all together. So just make sure that everything's sitting nicely and it's not dragging on anything, nothing caught up underneath there. And I'm just, as I'm overlocking, my eye is here, checking that I'm following that 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Oops. Right, so there's my offcuts. And there is my seam, which has been overlocked. And I should just trim off any of the extra bits. I can see that all my gathers are in there. And when I turn that through, ta-da! Beautiful puff sleeve head. I can see some of my gather stitches are just peeping through there. And that's where it is kind of useful if they're in a bright colour, but I can just whip them out quickly, and I'm done on that one. So I'm going to do exactly the same process on the other sleeve, and that's our sleeves done, or our sleeve heads done, I should say.